My name is Jennifer Gray Thompson, and I am the CEO of After the Fire. Welcome to the podcast, How to Disaster: Recover, Rebuild, and Reimagine. In this podcast, we bring you the very best practices, best hearts, and great ideas from other disaster-affected communities. Thank you for joining us. Welcome once again to the How to Disaster podcast, where we help you recover, rebuild, and reimagine. My name is Jennifer Gray Thompson, and I'm the CEO of After the Fire. Today's guest is very special to us. Much like last time's guest was Pamela Van Halsema, who does our community-to-community programs. This week, we have Molly Curley O'Brien. Molly Curley O'Brien is our Director of Grants and Government Affairs. Specifically, she works on our areas really that are before the fire. One of the weird things about mega fire that is totally possible but super challenging is that we have to both respond to these mega fires in real time, but also mitigate the danger, not only for the year after and the year after that, but for even decades after that. We anticipate for at least the next 10 to even 30 years, we're going to have to be in sort of this balance between the response and the resilience factor before then. This space depends on people who are innovators, and it depends on collaborative models of actually getting through. And we're very proud of our North Bay Forest Improvement Program, and we agreed to do this with CAL FIRE and with all these resource conservation districts because it was not only collaborative, but it was innovative. And it solved a really important problem, which is how do you keep us safe when a lot of landowners actually can't afford the full cost of mitigating the danger on their own land? And if we can mitigate that, we actually keep the rest of our wildland-urban interface much safer and even into the valley floors. I invited Molly on today because I wanted her to talk about the process of actually building something that hadn't been done before. I think she's done a tremendous job. While we had it before she came here, it really had no bones, no structure. We just knew that we had to get this done. And we knew that we wanted it to be scalable so any other place in the entire United States could take it, the exact model, and then not have to spend 2 years or a lot of investment, but really just adopt it and make it work for their own community. So I'm really excited to have Molly on today. I think you'll really enjoy her. And if you have any questions about Molly or our work, please visit us at www.afterthefireusa.org. And thank you once again for spending time with us on the How to Disaster podcast. Once again, welcome to the podcast, Molly Curley O'Brien.
Hi, thanks for having me today.
Well, I told the audience, in the intro that I was particularly excited, very proud to showcase all of your really amazing work. And I'm hoping that you can actually start out by orienting us about how did you even come to do this job or come to work at After the Fire?
Through a series of nonlinear opportunities. So in addition to the biggest heart component being that I'm from Sonoma County, and the North Bay fires that took place in 2017 really shifted my perspective and approach to how we take care of community and how I want to be a part in that effort. I come from a policy background, a nonprofit background, both policy, just to dive into that a little bit more, both at the local level and the state level, having worked for legislators and working for city governments to be able to understand both what it looks like for state level policy to inform implementation at a local level end. I have a master's in public policy and I have a MBA. And so all of this is sort of a hodgepodge quilt of things that sort of landed this perfect toolkit of tools to be able to come to After the Fire and be able to identify the work specifically in the North Bay Forest Improvement Program, to be able to know how to connect, how to collaborate, how to bring things together in order to make sense of this really complex puzzle that we were looking at the genesis of the project back in 2020.
I think that it was actually like, it felt very like kismet to me, because we were
Yeah.
just having a conversation about career. And then I was like, well, I have this thing that I
You
need
have
done.
this thing.
And yeah, and I have absolutely no idea how to do it. I know about policy a lot, but I have no idea how we're actually going to get this done. Would you mind coming to work for us and working on that area? And not only did you come and do that, but you put like, Cal Fire liked it so much and it was so successful that the original 1.5 million, they came in with another bucket of money and 3.5 million,
Yeah.
only like
Very
a
soon
year.
after.
Right. Like it was really a remarkable thing, but it's really a testament to all the hard work that went into it and the level of detail. So why don't you go ahead and talk to us about what exactly is the North Bay Forest Improvement Program?
What is the North Bay Forest Improvement Program? It is a remarkable body of work and program that stretches a 4-county region. So we're talking Lake County, Napa County, Mendocino County, and Sonoma County, specifically working with resource conservation districts in all 4 of those counties, plus Clear Lake Environmental Research Center up in Lake County, to partner with landowners to provide a cost incentive program for them to be able to perform land forest treatments and land stewardship projects, to be able to like elevate fire resilience projects on their private property. This had been an identified need from the perspective of Cal Fire to be able to participate and contribute grant dollars to what landowners could potentially do on their property in their efforts to combat or mitigate fire taking place on their land. I'll stop and say why that particular piece is so important, because I think that the question that I get most from people who are just learning about the program is, well, shouldn't the landowners just do that themselves? And the response is, that is such a oversimplification of what we're really talking about here. Because if we look at how much privately owned forested lands there are in this particular region, Sonoma County alone, 90% of all the forested lands is privately owned, 75% in Mendocino, 55% in Lake County. So we're talking about the majority of forested lands in these counties is not being treated in the same way that we're seeing at state level, or excuse me, state-owned property and federal property. So if we're only treating that slice of that percentage, but we're leaving this egregious amount of property left untouched because presumably it's up to the landowners, we are doing a disservice by everybody and rendering the efforts that are being done at the state level and the federal level obsolete, essentially. So I say that as my soapbox as to why this is so important, because the scope of work and the geography of it is so big. And like, not every landowner knows how to do their part. They want to be able to mitigate their risk of fire on their property. They want to be a good neighbor and be able to participate in what needs to be done in order to be more fire resilient moving forward. But the finances to be able to do that are incredibly, incredibly huge. And the education to be able to do that safely and successfully is also another component that costs money and costs time by the space of the resource conservation district. So all that context is to say that this program is essentially the first of its kind to be able to go into and work directly with the landowners and infuse public dollars to them to be able to both provide the work that needs to get done, but also the education to be able to do it correctly and safely, and then also to be able to compensate them for their time, because this doesn't necessarily mean that a landowner has to hire a team to be able to do that. What's really important, what felt really, really important about this program is that if the landowner is capable and wants to be able to do this themselves, they can, and they can be reimbursed for their time via this compensation.
So one of the questions that I get a lot, when I talk about this program, which we all love so much, is there's a perception that if you are a landowner, you are automatically wealthy. And in some in some counties, that might be true. But the cost of actually, if you have a $3 million piece of land, it's going to cost $2 million to actually like mitigate. I'm giving a big example of that, like a little bit out of the actual amount that it would be, but you're less likely to do it. And if you do, it won't be as ecologically sound either. So can you talk about that perception? And can you talk about how equity is actually built into the program? Because I'm very proud of how you all have, I say that because you and your committee, how you have made sure that that's a piece of it. I love that.
Yeah, so I'll start there. So the reimbursement rate is higher in both Lake County and Mendocino County based on census data that indicates that those counties are disadvantaged or severely disadvantaged. So, Lake County is the third most disenfranchised county in the state of California. So it is incredibly important that we are putting more resources into that region in addition to Mendocino to be able to make sure that we are giving everything that we can to make sure that these projects are taking place there, straight up, just there. And then also being able to provide even more resources to make sure that they are successful. So to your point about this assumption that land ownership is really only for the wealthy, while it can be assumed that there's some portion of land ownership that is owned by an affluent entity, that's such a small percentage. Then there is the family inheritance and property that's taking place there that, can, with the fourth, for example, generation of ownership of a family, the finances could potentially look very different now as they did when the property was first bought, with the asterisk being that the property value of whenever this was first bought looks very different than the property value now. And I will also say that there's a third bucket of who we're really talking about when we're defining who the landowner is that a lot of these properties are owned by many people in a way to create and generate wealth for themselves in these really expensive parts of the state that is very, very hard to make a living. So we're talking about LLCs, we're talking about groups of people that are going in on particular properties together, and they are collectively applying for these programs as well to be able to make sure that their home that they share with many people is fire resilient as well.
I think a good example of that is actually the case of Monan's Rill. Can you talk about Monan's Rill?
Yeah, and perhaps, Jen, you can actually fill in a lot of the blanks too, because we're both familiar with Monan's Rill. But Monan's Rill was one of the first projects that got off the ground for the North Bay Forest Improvement Program. They are an entity that's similar to what I just described, where there are a lot of folks going in on ownership of this particular plot of land together in Sonoma County that was heavily impacted by the glass fire in 2020. They were a remarkable partner, an incredibly knowledgeable partner, an example of folks who were being compensated for the work that they did on their own time and in their own hands, as opposed to hiring other folks to come in. And they were the first project to be completed, but it gets to the point of that this is not just one profile of land ownership. This is not one profile of project. That Monan's Rill represents both a project that was identified as being severely impacted by fire in the past, and excuse me, that gets at a collective way of owning property that we want to honor and recognize as a huge part of the swath of property ownership in the region that we're serving, that needs to be acknowledged as a stakeholder in this discussion that we're talking about.
And for those of you who are not familiar, Monan's Rill is a Quaker community. It's an intentional community centered around values that, are peaceful, and they've been excellent stewards of the land for like 35, 40 years. They were not new to the area. It wasn't just a corporation that came in and was like, oh, we have this swath of land here, help us pay for it.
Right.
They were people who really got hit hard. And I think they lost like 14 buildings in the glass fire. fire, and they not only had to, look at how to rebuild back in a way that could, retain their community, which they had worked for generations, or at least 2 generations to maintain, but how do they keep themselves safe too? Because the thing that people tend to miss when we're talking about private land ownership is the fires only start there.
Right.
They don't finish there. And this, it didn't start, the glass fire didn't start there either. It just like came through. And then what happens, like what happened in 2017 here in the Tubbs fire, for example, we have North Bay fires, are a complex fire of 11 fires across 4 counties, but the Tubbs fire was the most impactful. And it actually came down into the valley floor of Santa Rosa. And that's where it really did a huge amount of damage. 5,000 homes minimum, maybe 6,000 units of housing, really in a very short period of time. And so helping people who are up in the hills actually helps the whole community. So
yeah. And just another thing that I wanted to add about the importance of using Monon's Rill as an example of why this is so important. The North Bay Forest Improvement Program was not the first time that they had done fire resilience on their property. This is a community that's been doing this for a long time. The difference is that this was the first time that they were receiving some sort of government grant to do so, right? And how exciting that is, that this was available to them, that this was a feasible, approachable, applicable program for them to be able to receive funding fairly soon, to be able to do that. And especially after the urgency that they felt after the 2020 glass fire, I think that felt incredibly important, and another really big aha moment for us around why this work is so important moving forward.
And so can you talk about in Lake County, for example, they have about 70% of their land mass is burned, as you said, third, most disadvantaged county in the entire state of California. Very, very rural. We have 500,000 people in Sonoma County. They have about 67,000 people there. And so what is the cost share amount? What's the difference between like a wealthier county like Sonoma County and Lake County?
Great. So in Sonoma County, the project would be reimbursed at a 60%. So 60% of the total cost of the project would be reimbursed back to the landowner. In both Mendocino and Lake County, 80%.
Yeah. And can you talk about with rural landowners, especially in under-resourced counties, I love that you talked about the multi-generational piece of it, but what a lot of people don't know is with those multi-generational plots of land, you often don't have a mortgage or insurance. And so when we see these really rural places, Plumas County, Siskiyou County, there's so many Yuba right now that are even currently on fire. What people might miss is they might assume that these people have insurance, and they often don't, because they don't have a mortgage, and they are also in very high fire danger areas. And so it's even harder to get that. And they may only have access to a government program like the FAIR Plan in California, that is very expensive and doesn't cover a lot. So I just want to throw that in there. Can you talk about like so say somebody's listening to this and they're like, I love forest management, I would like this. Like, how did you even begin to approach this? Because all I did was say to you, we've got this thing. That's pretty much it. It's got to be done. And then how did you even begin and start that process? Like, let's be honest about all of that. Because
let's be honest.
I love that.
So my title at my job is the Director of Grants and Government Programs. And the reality that I sort of more identify with is more like senior cat herder. That's really what this has been like for the last 2 years. Where the first conversation that you and I had was, yes, I've got this thing, we need to make sense of it, we need to figure out what we're doing, and then going back to the actual policy and the grant agreements and being able to really understand what we were slated to do. And I'll stop there, and I will say that I don't think any single partner, which there are many in the North Bay Forest Improvement Program, anticipated how much time, effort, critical thinking skills, exercises of frustration and exercises of joy would be part of this program. So the secret sauce to all of this is that no one is doing this alone, right? The success rate would be minimal if there was just one entity that was leading this charge. So the good news is that these resource conservation districts that
okay, so Molly, not everybody's going to know what a resource conservation district is. Do you mind defining that for us?
Yeah, so a resource conservation district is baked in part of county government, a really old part of county government that was originally as a resource stop and for farmers and agriculturalists in the county to be able to receive education, resources, funding to be able to supplement their ag efforts on their property. So again, like a very specific effort to landowners in what that looks like in the particular county that it's serving. Now, as the resource conservation has grown to meet the need in our current climate, both in all of the definitions of what I mean by climate, resource conservation districts have taken on a lot of wildfire resilience work as well. And for example, are hiring registered professional foresters to be employed by resource conservation districts. Now, that's not for everybody, but that's the case for most of the resource conservation districts that we partner with for North Bay Forest Improvement Program, a vital part of the program as well, I would say. So in terms of the partnership and who is involved and how we did this together, how this actually came to be was just true collaboration in not just in a buzzword of collaboration, but really getting on the horn often to be able to make sense of what we needed to do. And it wasn't clear and it wasn't linear. And even still 2 years later, we're still coming up against questions around, oh gosh, well, we're at this stage of the program where this needs to be done. What does that look like? And I think it's just really, really important that we have all just been grounded in the common commitment to getting this work done and being able to make sense of these funding pipelines that are, again, ostensibly quite complicated, and making sure that we are actually moving money to the people that need it the most. And that's just required time, right? So it's required time, but it's also required a lot of commitment to each other so that not one person is left holding the bag. And it's been a really beautiful thing. I've been a part of a lot of projects and I've been part of a lot of collaborations, and it's been unlike any experience I've had before. And I'm really grateful.
So when you came on though, you had to build so much of this. And I love that you're really highlighting that none of us are doing this alone. And it's so true. And anyone who tries to go at this work alone is going to be very sad because it's just not going to work.
It's not going to work
whatsoever. And actually the beauty of working in disaster and resiliency is the opportunity for relationships and to have like the moment that you've had with this project, and because it's also transferable. And I love absolutely everything about that. But so you come on and you start convening with these RCDs,
yeah.
And then clerk, of course, which is sort of like a de facto organization like that in Lake County, and build
a 501c3 in Clear Lake, or excuse me, Lake County.
Yeah. So can you talk about though, like, so when you guys started tackling this, and I mean, clearly you're very well qualified to do this, but even with all of your qualifications,
it was hard.
Yeah.
Because the other thing that I sort of see as a larger issue that the North Bay Forest Improvement Program both shone a light on and perhaps found a solution for is that up until, let's say, 5 years ago, right? Or maybe in 2015, when mega fires started to really show up often, the people at the table who were talking about fire resilience were really the technical experts, foresters, fire ecologists, people who are employed in government to be able to do this work. And the work was not underscored by a sense of extreme urgency at that point. And then all of a sudden it was. And the project management, program management, funding and grant management that was required because there was all of this attention and all this money coming in, especially after 2017, there was this shift in what these technical experts were doing with their time, right? So it was less time in the field, what they were trained to do, and more time at a computer managing projects. And not to discredit that, that's obviously a part of their job and what they were trained for as well. But there was more and more of a there has been more and more of a need for what I like is the term an organizational backbone. That's a term that's been coined by the Stanford Social.
It's okay.
Okay.
See, the thing is that you can be like, it's Stanford. I can't remember the exact name, but I will look it up and we'll put it in the link in the description. So it's
Great.
fine. It's very easy like that, So, okay. So the backbone.
Yeah. So the organizational backbone leadership. So essentially being able to go in to a large collaboration like the one that we're talking about and not be the technical expert of the content in which we're providing a service for, right, but instead be the expert on how to balance the budget, how to manage the budget, how to manage the people, how to make sure that we are moving forward in our criteria, in our goals, in our data, in the way that we are showing up externally, and making sure that we are still moving forward. That is an inherent skill set that these folks did not go to graduate school for, right? That's not what they wanted to go to graduate school for. So it's being able to acknowledge that if we are going to continue to infuse millions and millions of dollars into government funded projects to be able to protect our communities in more resilient ways, we need to acknowledge the fact that the technical experts that have historically been the only ones at the table to do so need significant help. And so that's what Rebuild North Bay Foundation and its role in the North Bay Forest Improvement Program was able to do. It alleviated the RCDs from the administration that it was required to be able to do something so significant, and gave them the time to do the work that they needed to do specifically and directly with the landowners. And it was up to us to be able to design how we were going to actually pay people, how we were actually going to what compliance and oversight was going to look like for this type of project, the contracts, the list can go on of all the administrative stuff that's required for something like this. And that was an incredibly important part of this program when the proposal was sent out to be able to allocate funding for.
And when we said yes to this, we were still a 4-county based organization called Rebuild North Bay Foundation. That is our parent 501c3. And we were in a unique position because we were formed in the middle of the fires. And so we didn't, our programming was fluid according to what our communities needed at that time. So when they approached us through a board member, Dr. Lisa McKaylee, and she was like, yes, we will. And, a big part of being resilient is innovation. And the only way you can actually innovate is if you're willing to say yes, even if you're not even quite sure how you're going to pull it off, or if you have the staff to do it. But, in your case, like you came on with an MPP and an MBA, really helpful, because those of us who love policy, we're also incredibly aware that all policy pretty much comes from this statement: somebody should do something. But finding the right somebodies to do the right something so it actually accomplishes the outcome is much harder to do than people really understand. And so can you speak to like bringing that policy and that business of that MBA experience to this process of starting with this, somebody should do something, to executing?
Yeah, so somebody should do something about this. That question turns into how, and then
right.
And then that's where I came in, right? It was, and even in my academic experience, it only takes you so far. It only takes you so far into these more applied opportunities to be able to say, okay, this is the policy. This is all what needs to be done in order to make this happen. And I think that what it really felt like more often than not in those very nascent stages of this project was actually just sitting down and committing to this might sound a little silly, but y'all are just going to go with it too. I don't know if you ever had the experience of having a necklace sort of a chain necklace tie up in a bunch of knots, and just needing to sit down and actually designate the time to untangle it.
Yeah.
That's what is provided when someone says someone should do something about this. Here you go. It's this tangled up mess of like, here's the money, here's the general goals that we want to try to accomplish. Here are the metrics to be able to understand whether or not we're success. Now, what do we do with all of this? And it took a lot of ideating in the terms of innovation. It took a lot of conversation. It took a lot of eating humble pie to be able to say that I don't understand any of this in the technical space, but if you understand, if you explain it to me from a perspective of a layperson, I could probably get this together. And I think that with that said, that was actually probably one of the better parts of me being a part of this, as opposed to having another technical expert to be able to have the capacity and time to be able to bring this project together, was me being able to say, to pump the brakes and say, no, that doesn't make sense. We need to make sure that these particular lines or these particular documents or this particular outreach needs to be even more cleared up, because a lop and scatter is not something that people get. Mastication is not something that people get. I mean, we're talking about like really specific, or acronyms for that matter. You know, what does CFIP mean? What does CEQA mean? What are all these things that are so important to the integrity of the project, but need to be spelled out? And so it was me just sort of with a bunch of Post-its and a lot of arrows and talking about how this, like, what are the stages that need to get done? Oh, and then going back and say, oh, you know what, I didn't think about this particular contract and what this particular exhibit says. So I need to be able to plug that in. And it took about a year. It took about a year of planning on both individually and with my partners to be able to get something off the ground. And I will say that while we launched in 2021, which is actually quite fast, consider we signed contracts with CAL FIRE that summer before, our program has changed a lot in that year and a half since then. The application looks different. The criteria for project selection looks different. The way that we meet looks different. What reports are most helpful look different. But it takes just starting, and there's so much of like, well, we're just going to start here. This is stage one. Going to put it out there into the universe, get some feedback, and then go back to it. There's never been a moment at this point where it's been static yet.
I think that space too of saying, I may have all this education, but I don't know. And I find that that's like a superpower to be able to say, I don't know, because only then do you actually give yourself the space to learn and to be vulnerable in that way. And, you know, it's hard sometimes for people to say that because they're afraid that people are going to equate, I don't know exactly how to do this, with I'm not competent to do this. And those are very, very different things.
Correct.
You got to give people room to learn and to grow and to even make mistakes. Like, that's going to happen. But if your outcome though is so incredibly important. So can you talk about one of the changes that's come, you know, out of say the past year of implementation that you're very excited about, that you think is going to be more effective for we always think about in our organization, the end user. Who's the end user? It's the person like at Monan's Roll, right? Like, yeah.
And just to sort of go back to the first part of what you said, Jennifer, about, you know, the difference between I don't know and not feeling like you can, for competency and how it shows up differently. I think that resilience requires a 360-degree view of whatever the topic matter is. And in this case, we're talking about fire resilience, but to just have fire experts talk about resilience is not going to create a resilient project. And so it's a really good thing to have folks be part of the conversation and part of the project, for that matter, to be able to identify the holes that a subject matter expert is not seeing, right? So that we are collectively acknowledging two things. We're collectively acknowledging that as individuals, we do not know the full scope of what's needed to get done, and that together we can figure it out. And so I think that that's been a pretty remarkable exercise for all of us in the North Bay Forest Improvement Program. And I think that that stems to what feels most exciting. The end user, of course, is always really great to be able to provide resources so that folks can participate in the collective resilience that we're trying to elevate in our region, but also that this is happening, that there's conversations of the North Bay Forest Improvement Program happening elsewhere.
Yeah.
I think that this is why CAL FIRE invested this in the vein of innovation, in the vein of let's see if this works type of mentality, to be able to say, oh gosh, it is working. And here are folks in other regions in California who are interested in being able to implement something similar, right? Because all of this time and effort on all of our points it's worth it. It's worth it for the region, but it makes it exceptionally more worth it when we can take our created wheel that, you know, as much as it's still in development, there's still things that need to be figured out. But if we can just take that and show other folks to be able to not have to start at the square that we started, would be wonderful, right? So that they can just kind of adopt it and then figure it out, you know, take things out, put things that are better for them, that would work better for their region in, so that they can just kind of get it up and running in a faster way. That to me feels really important, and a huge obligation as the project administrator to make sure that any sort of institutional knowledge that I'm cultivating in this is being put into an external facing opportunity for someone else to be able to adopt.
And it really speaks to also, like, from the very beginning in this organization, the board was clear, I was clear, we were all clear, and everyone who comes on, or they don't last very long otherwise, you know, that we have to do things that allow other communities to not begin at the beginning, period. And so if people are like, well, how does this relate to the rest of your community to community work? And I'm like, it's right in the exact same vein. The idea is that we're willing to innovate. We're willing to say, I don't know, but, you know, we know this needs to be done, and we're willing to dive in and even get it wrong or have the flexibility, really important, to change it as you go. But adaptable tools and systems for communities to not only respond to mega fire, but also to mitigate the danger. And so this is one of the reasons I really love this program. And even, and also I am not a subject matter expert in it. And I think that that's actually been great for me. I'm not going to lie. It's been good. I can just be like, they know what they're doing. And if there's any problem, then I will, you know, help in the way they need me to do it. But I hope that you continue to feel incredibly proud of that. And, I really want to make sure we talk about how important it is, though, say that somebody does want to do a program like this. It's, you know, to actually go out into the field and have site visits to actually meet the people and the places you're impacting. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so it's, and something that actually I'm just realizing that felt important to say at the beginning, so much of this was taking place during COVID. So all of this programming was designed in Zoom wormholes. So and especially given the fact that, you know, much of this has to do with, you know, being out in the field, it was exceptionally challenging to be able to try to understand all of this with just sort of reading about it and hearing about it via Zoom and via phone. So I say all that because the site visit the field visits are great. They are just starting after a long time of not being able to. And it is the cherry on top of being able to understand that, again, that 360-degree view of why this work matters, and to be able to see the actual product of government money spent. What a concept, right? That government money was actually started in the coffers of a state account, and it moved with a couple of glitches to an end user who was then able to use it in the way that they had intended. You know, there's oversight there. If you do not do the project to 80% of what the prescribed proposal says, you do not get reimbursed. And there is a there is a review of that project by a registered professional forester to be able to determine that
That's
compliance.
right. Yeah. Mhm.
And
There are public funds. And so, I mean, even with non-public funds, we'd always be very careful. With public funds, there is that extra layer of scrutiny as there should be. So.
yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I say that all because there is opportunity to be able to do that field, to be able to go out into the field and be able to see this work and be able to also see just how many people are part of this project. It's not even a handful. It is many, many people.
Yeah. Well, and then to hear about, that it's made a difference in how much they could do, how much safer we are. And it's just at the beginning and there's so much more to do. But, with every big problem, you have to just start somewhere. And
yeah.
I feel super proud that our organization was the beginning, of something, and that we had the capacity. And again, thank goodness you were not a registered forester and you had all of these other skills to really fill this unique role that was needed. And I really, I'm very, and it sounds almost paternalistic. I don't mean it that way, but I'm very proud of the work that you've done here. And I'm very certain that I'm very certain we would not have been able to do it, at least in this, we'd probably still be working on the design, quite frankly. If had you not actually taken the helm of that. What would you like to do? Like, did this experience sort of change the field you wanted to go in? Because you were in policy, but a slightly different field before. So can you talk about like what you see out there, what you're super interested in, and what you hope for?
Yeah, I think that, resilience is the name of the game right now. Climate has changed.
Yeah.
The climate crisis is something that we are in a lived experience in, and to be able to be a part of efforts to live in face of it, with it is what feels most important to me. So, having, I think that there's a lot of opportunity and need and dire need to have wildfire resilience, especially in this region. So to be able to continue to live in this space. I mean, I also feel like in the last 2 years, I've learned so much about forestry, and I know what a lop and scatter is, and I can identify field work from a highway. And that's incredibly, I never anticipated being able to do that, but here I am to be able to say, I know exactly what's going on there. And, whoever's in the car with me being like, what, I don't see anything. So that,
Right.
so that feels like something that I've got to continue. Right. And be able to steward and be able to share and be able to encourage others to do so, because the need is so great. And even though there's more people that are coming to that proverbial table to help the people that have been there from the get-go get the job done, more and more people need to. So it feels imperative that I stay. And with the North Bay Forest Improvement Program and how it shows up in different facets and different projects elsewhere as well.
I think it's empowering too, to take something that's really pretty scary, which is this era of climate-based disasters that are so frequent. And in our area in particular, mega fires. Now they tell us a mega flood, and we had a small earthquake yesterday. And I'm just like, whatever, what are you going to do? So you got to stare it in the eye, and you just got to be like, that's fine. This is the reality of it. So how are we all going to use our different skill sets, to get to the other side? And I think you're going to do great things. And I mean, you've done something great here, but I think that this is like such a wonderful beginning for you to make an impact that is going to help us, get through this, what promises to be a very challenging time, full of, the need for really good minds, good hearts, and humble hearts too.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Oh yeah, no problem. Well, of course. I mean, this feels like a calling and a duty at this point. And just from an economic standpoint, something that just feels important about why resilience matters is, the data point that you and I both share often around how it's, for every $6 that's spent in fire suppression, it's $1 for fire resilience. So, the economic reasoning of being able to allocate huge dollars for resilience has spades on the return of investment to be able to protect our communities better in the future. So it feels like from that perspective of like, this is imperative that we keep doing this, and that we highlight this, and that we advocate for this, and that we share that this is this is part of the equation, and that fire suppression is more expensive, and it's not going away. We're going to have to have large
work,
but well, we can talk about that later. But to have it live as a higher valued thing, if budgets are statements of values and we value resilience, then we need to see it talked about more in the budget.
We do, and I'm glad you brought that up, because we have talked about this a lot. When I get a question from a reporter or somebody like a national reporter, and they're like, why should somebody in this area like Burbank or Iowa help to pay for resiliency in another area? And my answer is always like, they're paying for it anyway. You know, they want to pay 6 times as much, or $1 or $1 or $6. That's pretty much the deal. And then we all have a responsibility too. And as a community, like we have a community of the North Bay, we have a community of the state of California, we have a community of the American West, of our country, and then of our globe, because this is happening everywhere. It's everywhere.
And it might not be fire, but it is in an era of a climate crisis. The mutual aid is going to be needed in some level, regardless of where you are. And if we were to actually just go back to the fires and talk about air quality, a really good anecdote to be able to understand why it matters that federal tax dollars from the East Coast go to California to support this. About a year ago, during the 2021 fire season, I was emailing with one of the landowners who was visiting family on the East Coast. We were in the coordination of getting contracts signed for a project to take place on some land in Sonoma County. And he said that he was looking into this outside and saw the smoke that was from fires here.
Dixie Fire.
So, to be able to, and there you go. That's the most tangible way that you can reason around why this is important, that collectively that we're all doing this together, because the air that we breathe is connected. And if fire smoke is taking place here, it's not just going to stay in California, it's going to float elsewhere. And so we don't want that. We want to be able to mitigate that as much as possible. And this is how we can do so.
And all in our little part. So is there anything that I that you wished I would have asked you today, or anything I've left out, or anything you want to add into it before we wrap up here?
Yeah, just one quick note, just kind of to go off on that regional component, and that, smoke is obviously going elsewhere. Fire doesn't just keel over when it reaches the county line. Yeah. So one of the really cool things about the North Bay Forest Improvement Program is that it's this regional effort, right? And in its next stage, its next chapters, I'd love to be able to see this done more. But it's what we're really trying to say is, fires that are taking place in Lake County, they're moving into Napa County, they're moving into Sonoma County. So in addition to doing our best to be able to treat forested land that's privately owned, because if we only treat what's publicly owned, we're not being resilient. But if we're only investing dollars in one county and not the other that's sharing a forest, that's sharing trees, then we're also not resilient that way. So I think that that's one of the really great things about this multi-county program, is that it's beginning to address that. And like I said, what I would love to be able to see in an iteration or two is being able to do like a shaded fuel break across county lines. That
okay, people aren't going to know what that is, so go ahead and define.
Shaded fuel break is being able to take a swath of land and being able to remove all of the underbrush, all the vegetation, still keep trees, hence the shaded canopy that's still there, but that it's not as congested with all the other types of smaller or flammable or dry parts of the of a forest that's been removed, so that the trees are just there, and that if there's fire to take place, it moves slower.
I always call it, I say two things. Our eyes are not used to seeing a healthy forest. We are not, we don't know what that looks like, because we haven't lived, like it's been 70 years since we really saw that, or, this policy of constant fire suppression. Smokey the Bear needs to be reimagined, or, done away with, but reimagined for sure. So once we had the North Bay fires, I mean, I didn't know. I drove through Glen Ellen and I thought, oh, the apocalypse is here and it's just going to remain charred forever, you know, like a home would. But then like 3 weeks later, nature's all, oh, hey, I got this.
Yeah.
Here's like a bunch of green grass, and also I'm going to bloom the things that I haven't bloomed. And now when you go to Sonoma Valley Regional Park, where they regularly use prescribed burns and some of the other forest treatments, you can see all the way through the forest, and they're not destroying it. They're actually doing what indigenous people would have done and did do for thousands of years before really we interrupted that. So
Right.
that's one of the things that I'm hoping that we also like, you know, find our way through that, actually learning to see. I always call it the garbage forest.
Right.
Underneath
Well,
the canopy.
and we don't fund prescribed burning
Right.
in this project, just to be clear. We do a pile and burn that can get something like that, but not a traditional prescribed burn.
But we do see a huge shift, especially in this state in particular, around centering indigenous voices and practices and people in how it is that we should be addressing this very real, you know, physical, economic, mental, all the threats that these mega fires present. I'm very happy to see not only, you know, the interaction with the forest in like with the North Bay Forest Improvement Program, but also for using cultural fire burns to do the same thing. And maybe in another iteration of the North Bay Forest Improvement Program, we will also see that element too, you know, one would hope. So anything else you'd like to leave us with, Molly? Like any, you know, thoughts, you know, anything at all?
We're just getting started.
Love that.
You know, it's gonna look different in a couple of years, and I think about that often now. Think like, you know, what is this all going to look like when this is a multi-million-dollar, 8-figure program? And just to think back to the humble beginnings that it started with is really exciting. And because I believe it with every fiber of my being that this is something that can really take off across the state and beyond that as well. So stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Well, that's a perfect way to leave this. Thank you, Molly, for all of your amazing work and for being on the How to Disaster podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us on the podcast, How to Disaster. For more information, please visit our website at afterthefireusa.org. And if you liked this video, please hit subscribe.